This is We the Sales Engineers podcast, show 310.
Welcome to We the SEs podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. We're a pre-sales podcast where we talk about sales engineering, solution engineering, whatever you want to call it. A big aspect of selling is working with the customers after the sale for the simple reasons that they either continue buying from that company or they don't. And my discussion today is with my guest. His name is Fadi Bassil. He's the VP of support at Incorta, and that includes customer success, anything post-sales. Basically, he takes care of that. And I wanted to talk about the strategy behind, like, when does CS get involved? How do you shift your support team from being a reactive organization to a proactive organization? So we discussed a lot of different things. Now, we had a technical issue at the end, which we didn't know about. For some reason, when I was doing the not so fire round, it stopped recording Fadi's side, the software that I use. But I'll give you a brief overview of what basically the book that he mentioned. It'll be in the show notes of this podcast, which is wethesalesengineers.com/show 310. With that, let's jump into the conversation with Fadi. Fadi, fellow Lebanese journeyman, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Hi, Ramsey. Good to talk to you.
Likewise, I'm happy to have you on the show. We met last week, and I kind of feel like I know you a lot better than I did before we met, obviously. But for those who have never heard of you and don't know you, do you mind letting people know who you are?
Yeah, sure. So Fadi Bassil, I am, as you mentioned, I'm originally Lebanese living in the UK. I'm currently the Vice President of Global Customer Support at Incorta, which is a business intelligence SaaS type solution. And, my career has been probably over the last 20 years within business intelligence, machine learning, AI, both as a founder of two consultancies, more or less successful, not as much probably, more learning than success, I would say. And then within like vendor space, really, for solutions covering that space. Married with two kids, as I mentioned, living in the UK, south of London for the international audience, and in a nice area called Tunbridge Wells.
Nice. So you mentioned you're of Lebanese origin. How long have you been in the UK?
I've been in the UK for, I think, coming up to 14 years now. Okay. But I mean, majority of my youth, probably my first company and my first job were in Lebanon, and then packed and came to the UK.
I'm just looking at this because you went from, being someone who lives in Lebanon to a VP of global customer support and solution consulting and that sort of thing in 14 years. Like, you came from a country to a different, you moved countries, and you've accomplished a lot. What do you think is your secret to accomplishing so much in what I would consider a short period of time?
Probably saying yes to a lot of opportunities that come my way and figuring it out. I think that's really, if I put kind of the secret sauce is saying yes to opportunities and being lucky, really.
It's funny because a lot of you listen to a lot of gurus, and a lot of them talk about the power of saying no, and you're kind of saying the opposites. Just don't always say no. Don't.
Yeah,
sometimes
I mean, I mean, I think probably it's saying no for the right reason. I think it's more like if it's saying no because something feels risky, or because like I'm too worried or too afraid to say yes, then that's the wrong reason.
Okay. So fear is not a criteria.
Exactly. And this is where, like, hey, if it feels a bit risky, then maybe yes is the right answer for it, and then pivot along the way.
Okay. So, all right, what are how did you get to become where you are? What are the roles that you had to? What are the opportunities that came your way, and you had to excel at them to become where you are?
Yeah, I think probably it's like making the jump, leaving Lebanon again. Like I had a really good job in Lebanon for the country, really stable. I mean, I was already married, uh, settled with like apartment, and it's like just kind of life was sorted. And then I think things felt too comfortable, and probably you know as well as a fellow Lebanese, there's always like this need to, hey, it's greener on the other side, so I need to make the jump. So
Yeah.
I came here, did the MBA, and I think looking at the market, probably this is kind of what I meant by saying yes, or like figuring out things to jump into. Late into like the MBA, which is kind of 1 year in the UK, 2012, started getting into social media analytics, and saw a gap in the market where there's a lot of tools that offer like high level numbers, like metrics, like you have 10 followers, 100 followers. And I'm talking early days social media now, not now
Yeah.
when you have like the whole thing figured
Everything.
out, right?
Yeah.
And then saw an opportunity of, hey, you know what? Maybe there's a deeper level of analysis that can be done, like looking at the actual conversations, like mining content, like getting text insight. And then jumping all into this, spending 3 years selling it, both as technical and as sales activity into it, right? And then 3 years into this, figuring out, all right, there is potentially an opportunity. We're getting projects where maybe we don't want to be, so is it time to pivot? And then part of it's taking a step back. So like my first role at Ultrix was first customer support there, and that's after having my own company. So if I look at it like in absolute, it was like a step back, joining customer support. But at the same time, it was the right customer support, because effectively it was consulting under the guise of customer support, and it's having the conversation with the head of EMEA in a team of 8 to say, all right, so this is what we're doing. Can park the title. We're building a business. 9 months down the line, that same person said, oh, we need to sell into France. Is there anyone who speaks French? And I raised my hand. And then, yeah, I can do it. I'll pick it up. So now we're covering Europe. And now I transitioned into a sales engineer. And then through kind of the transitions, just took the team, built the business, ended up kind of living with 4 major regions in EMEA. A team of 50 plus sales engineers, and then the management to support that, having had the opportunity from just joining as a customer support person, or the only customer support person, to then build a whole function really within EMEA. Why? Because again, it's like it looked like the right jump at the time,
Right.
and then seeing those jumps and picking up on them.
How hard was the decision though? Like, I know right now you're talking about it as if it's like it's obvious. It's an obvious decision to do, but in the moment,
Yeah,
in the
hindsight,
moment,
yes.
how hard was the decision, and how did you make that decision?
It's hard in the sense of, so there's an element of personality. It is hard, right? It is hard to make this decision in the sense of I need to put my ego on the side. I need to figure out, like, is it the right move? Am I getting stuck? Where am I going with this? And I think, but at some point, and that's something that, again, I like, let's say if I'm talking to my brother, I have two younger brothers. I would say that it's like more kind of with experience saying, well, if I can't answer these questions, I need to trust what my gut's telling me. And one of my mentors is like, even till today, you say you have to trust with your gut. I mean, you need to look at data, but at some point, like these questions, you cannot figure out. Like, there's no way you can answer, is this the right move in absolute? So you need to accept taking a risk.
Yeah.
Is your gut telling you go for the risk? And then the other part of this, and probably it's easier for me now to make these decisions versus before, is with experience, I know that I can pivot. Like, you're never stuck in making these decisions.
Yeah.
and then knowing that I can pivot.
Yeah. When we're younger, we always think that the next decision is the that's it. Like if we make that decision, we either have to live with that decision, and there's nothing we can do about it. As you grow older, you can think about it. It's like, well, if I make that decision, it doesn't work, I can always go back, or I can always
100%.
pivot, as you said. But I don't know. Yeah, when we're younger, which is interesting because when we're younger, there's less at risk, generally speaking.
Yeah.
And yet it's harder for us to make these kinds of decisions. Maybe I'm generalizing, but that's what
I think it's
go ahead,
experience, and I think this is where, like, again, I mean, if we condense it as what I mean, online you see everyone talk about like Jeff Bezos's way of making decisions, like is it type 1, type 2? I mean, in reality, I think like almost all decisions are two-way doors, right, in our life. And when it's really a one-way door, I would hope that I would see it as a one-way door, right? But that's not most of the decisions that we make.
Yeah. Well, I feel if it's a one-way door, it's not really a choice. Like you have to go through that. Like you have to go through
we're
it.
getting at that point.
Yeah. And that's interesting because you went from director of sales engineering, which everyone thinks is, if you look at levels of like experience, sales engineering higher than support.
Yeah,
that's
the unfortunate reality of the world. Yeah, that's a perception.
But so you went from sales engineering and again back to customer support or customer success. Obviously, one was director, one is VP, so maybe that helped. But how did you make that decision as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting because again, I think it's unpacking the details in the sense of when I was looking at moving to Incorta and to my current role, yes, it's customer support, the mandate and the expectation of the role, and the reason why I was brought in anyway, like given my profile, right? Because you can look at it from the other perspective of like this guy doesn't know customer support, so what is he doing coming into customer support, right? Like it goes both ways. And the mandate was, all right, so we want as an organization to transition customer support to move into more of the customer success, customer engagement type model, from much more of a deeper engineering technical perspective into interacting on like specific engineering issues into, all right, so we need to look at it more broadly as like a customer engagement. And this is where my experience, both being deeply technical much earlier in my career, but also having that sales engineering, technical sales hat, right, into the conversations, matched nicely into, all right, this is what we want to build out. Plus, obviously, the experience of building out teams across EMEA helps. From my perspective, again, it's like this interest, because the way I look at it, again, with experience, probably, I was going to say maturity, probably, let me phrase it as experience, it's looking at customer journey end to end. And that's kind of what we were chatting about just kind of before we started recording. It's looking at, all right, from the initial engagement, through the technical buying decision, through handover, through post-sales, through value realization, through like this whole cycle that's ongoing. I look at it as an end-to-end journey. And when I looked at this, that all made sense to me, right? So now I'm no longer the person who's selling and kind of throwing it over the fence to someone else. I've become more of, all right, so now I'm taking whatever was sold. We need to figure out how to make the customer successful. And in my mind, this is building my expertise across the customer journey, really.
Okay, there's so much to unpack in the couple of minutes that you spoke. First off, could you differentiate for me, like, what's the difference between customer support and customer engagement? Because support gets engaged with customers, right? So what do you mean by customer engagement, and what's the difference between that and customer support?
So if I simplify it, it's really what are the objectives that you have for your team, and then what's your team mix, right? In the sense of, so they are, when we're looking at, what do I mean by like moving the team more into customer engagement. It's really building out the interaction model and the engagement model of even interaction model team, plus the processes around, all right, now that's coming through at me, and I need to just address that question. I need to look more holistically around like the account. What are we looking from the account? Now, again, it doesn't have to be at the support engineer level, but then you're building the whole function to start looking, all right, beyond the tickets, how do I want to structure my team? What do I want to focus on? What do I want to measure them on? Example being, should I treat every engineering problem as an interesting problem and I go figure it out and come back? Or am I treating every ticket as a conversation with a customer, and updates on the tickets and the way I talk to the customer is as important as going and solving a very interesting engineering problem? These are two different focus points because, again, they have like time, right?
Yeah, and they both sound positive, right? Like the way
100%,
right.
100%.
But it's
Because
interesting
if I map
the
it
way
to
I
the SE world, if I map it to the SE world, it's the equivalent of saying, all right, us as an organization, we want to focus on making sure that the buyers have an emotional connection with the product. And one way to do this is to have them hands-on work with the product during the sales cycle versus, and again, let me actually take a step back, as I need to contextualize my comments. So my experience is within B2B software SaaS. And I would love your take as well, because potentially you're looking from it from a different perspective. Like I say, if I'm selling hardware, it may be different, right? But from B2B SaaS, I can take like as an SE the perspective of saying, all right, I want to focus on the buyer's connection with the product, and therefore I want them to do hands-on engagement before they buy. Or I want to say, all right, well, actually what I want to do is like massive enterprise sales where maybe I have more focus on the big ticket item sale, selling to the CEO who will never be hands-on. So therefore, it's more of a proof of value. We go build it, show them the outcome, hand over and do implementation. Both are correct for the right strategy and why you're doing them, right? Like none of them is better than the other. It's just what are you doing? And same for support, right?
Yeah. From my perspective, we pretty much do the same. It's just a longer cycle because there's a little bit more hardware to manage. Because in my industry, users have a lot of say. The users are who are using the product on a day-to-day basis, and they're the ones who are gonna say, yes, it's easy to use. Yes, it's doing what the higher level want it to do. So I 100% agree with you. Even if we're selling to the C level, in the end, someone's gonna have to use it underneath them. So having hands-on experience is good. I feel like I differentiate when you say customer engagement versus customer support. I'm seeing one as proactive and one as reactive. Right? I worked in support, and I didn't engage the customer unless there is a ticket, and it was all about that interesting engineering problem. And then when I moved into sales engineering, there was a team member that we called field service engineer, and their job was first line of support. And I noticed that when he treats the problem as a engineering problem, we're losing out on sales. Is that kind of where you're going with that?
So that's where the focus again, given a smaller team, there is like less necessarily differentiation of teams doing the different model. It was then the requirement of, as we are scaling, can we at least have an initial level of the same team doing both effectively, but with a more focus into what you mentioned around it's a conversation with another human that we're building out. Now, the other side of where that becomes interesting is then what we've done in looking at it as how can we then make it also at least cost neutral. And this is kind of, again, going back with what am I bringing from like the SE sales hat into like post sales? It's monetizing. Like, can we identify a segment of our customers that for the right proposition are willing to pay for premium support? And that's a product that we then build out and packaged and offered as a way to generate additional like upsell, but also make support like cost neutral. And we're going into like now finance, but that it won't move support from being a cost of goods sold, but at least it will make the CFO happier when you go and ask for headcount, because there's a counterbalance of the revenue that's coming in.
Yeah, I mean, support has always been a cost center, but if you can make them, what you were saying, cost neutral. So even in large, like my current organization, we work with a lot of enterprise. So the SE and the salesperson, there is no customer success. The SE and the salesperson are responsible for pre-sales, post-sales, and the whole journey, the implementations and all that. And if the customer doesn't implement it, we lose out on future sales or renewals. So I wouldn't say it's just small startups that require the full journey. I think the larger the customer, it's better to have a single point of contact rather than a million points of contact. What are your thoughts around that?
In your current organization, do you have a professional services arm? Because at Incorta, I want to make sure that it's clear that there are professional services implementation teams, and there's a small CSM team that's actually handling the kind of higher level engagement, I would say.
Yeah, so in my company, I don't know how much I can get into it, but there's sales, there's sales engineers or solutions engineers. There are professional services, and there are support, like in case of a bug or something. Most of my customers are fairly technical, so they don't generally need help with implementations. So they're not very used. But I know, like, I work with the likes of like the large network element manufacturers. So everyone they hire is an expert in automation, is an expert in routing. So they don't need help with that. But when you go out there and you work with like smaller service providers, where their job isn't to build routers, it's to use routers, that's where so it depends on the customer and who might need the professional services.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ramzi, because I think we're touching on. I think you started hinting into like the conversation that's been, I guess, at least on LinkedIn, boiling over like over the last year around like, do you need CSMs? Don't you need CSMs? Should the AEs and the SEs cover the whole spectrum? I think you're touching on the point of, I think if it goes back to both the organization and the customer base maturity, and what do you expect like from each role to answer this question. I think like it's like any good business answer, like, it depends. But then what's the parameters?
Yeah, what do you think are the parameters? I have some thoughts, but I want to, maybe we can share them and brainstorm some parameters for the folks listening. When should people use CSMs? Like a lot of companies don't see SEs as a necessity, right? Let alone CSMs, especially at like smaller companies. Like, oh, we just hire a salesperson, and the engineer does this, does the like the whole person developing the product will do the demos. So they're the SE at the same time, and we'll figure out support after. Why? When do you think a company would need a CSM?
So I think probably let's break it out differently, because the titles the titles would get confusing. So if we go like to first principles, right, it's looking all right. What is my current expectation of activities? Who's covering them? And usually it makes sense, like first you're starting with an account executive, right? That person would cover. In many cases, you can go channel, you can go different routes. But let's say kind of simplify it. Let's say you're starting with an account executive. If the product is sufficiently self-service, then maybe you don't actually need an SE. And what you need is a CSM post-sales who's making sure that the customer is realizing value. Or maybe you can say the AE is doing that as well. But then you go back to the question of, what am I getting the AE focused and compensated on? Is it logos, as in, is it land? Or is it expand? Or is it both? Because if it's both, then your compensation needs to reflect that. And I think where companies probably get it wrong is less the definition of when do I need a CSM or an SE and AE, but it's more around doing transitions but not aligning compensation. An example being moving from having a CSM team saying, well, actually, I don't want a CSM team now, but then keeping the compensation of the account executive as probably 95 with 5% on renewals, with a stick that's filled a bucket, but then expect that you'll get the same coverage, right? I mean, that's a compensation mismatch versus an expectation mismatch. Right?
Well, it's incentivization mismatch.
Agree. That's a good way to phrase it. So going back to the person again, it's like, so if I'm thinking about this, I'm looking at what are the expectations of, like, if I look at my customer journey, what are the areas of need? And then can I cover them with existing teams? So like, is it the AE? If the product's technical to sell, then do I need an SE? So that defines the SE role. If it's consumption, and I think this is where maybe it's interesting, if it's a consumption model or a land and expand model, kind of it's a simpler version probably of consumption, then maybe the SE and the AE need to own the post-sale, because this is where the actual well,
that's where you make the money.
Getting the revenue. I mean, this is where kind of the revenue is justifying their commission, right?
Yeah.
So this is where you have a see. But then if it's really like the sale is done and now it's value capture and retention, then do I really want the AE and the SE focused there, or do I want to have them go and look for more net new customers and then have a CS or a team that's responsible for that ongoing journey, right? And I've seen probably like different models being done, some more successful than others, including transitions. And from what I've seen, it's really like the incentive, making sure that we're doing it for the right reason, and then the incentives align.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about incentivization. Most companies don't know how to incentivize their people, or which is actually, this is the question that I've always had. I know AEs are commission based, 50-50 or 60-40 base versus commission, sometimes 100% commission. SEs are 70-30 or 80-20. How are CSMs incentivized?
It varies. I've seen, and I've been like part of teams where it's either 80-20 or just fixed plus bonus. Now there are transitions into, again, like if you can call account manager CSMs as well, and in some organizations they do, like it's account management CSM, and it becomes with kind of closer to a sales commission, probably 70-30, 60-40, like it varies. But again, if it's more traditional, let's say TAM, like technical account management, or like the more generic CSM, then probably it's either 80-20 or like fixed plus bonus. I think the transition in at least in BI SaaS has been more, and I'm not sure like if it's broader. It would be interesting to look at this within SaaS from non-quota carrying CSMs into quota carrying CSMs, at least on renewal. I think where before it was more, let's look at the overall customer retention. Now it's like you have a target of renewal that you need to own and you need to renew.
So in my world, we don't have CSMs. It's account managers. When the CSM is working with a customer and they're able to upsell, right? Like add more licenses, whatever the model is that something that CSM takes care of, or is that do they have to bring in an account manager or an account executive to sell more licenses?
So in both places that I've worked in, so both at Alteryx and Incorta. Again, Alteryx I'm not sure like right now, but when I was there, the account executive in the end owned the paperwork. Let's put it this way. So they own the actual transaction and the paperwork. Now, but this is where you get into like this overlap and like, why do you need a CSM then, right? And probably this is where, if I want to segment it, and maybe we can look at it. It's easier to look at it from an SE versus CSM separation. Like when do you involve an SE in a post sale?
Right.
And probably what you just mentioned is an example of saying, all right, so if it is an expansion of license within the existing business unit, so essentially it's more of the same, let's put it this way, and it makes sense to keep it within the CSM. If it's new, whether it's account, like within the account or net new account, then it makes sense then to bring the SE as, hey, it's a net new business, do your SE cycle, right? And I think this is a transition that we went through at Alteryx, because in the early days, there were no CSMs. So we, the SEs, and I like the title of your show, we, the SEs, run the end-to-end, right? So it's like land, expand model. You're taking care of anything that's related to the technical engagement of the customer, obviously outside support, which is specifically product issues. And then we went through this transition of, all right, now we have a CSM team, so how do you differentiate? And one of the differentiating criteria was, all right, so is it net new or is it just more of the same? And that defines the roles and responsibilities. And then over time, even like the teams at Alteryx transitioned into even paid CSM for, like, let's say, white glove type engagements, and that becomes like even like a totally different type conversations. But in both, well, across the journey at Alteryx and now at Incorta, the account executive is a key member of any of these conversations, and then typically owns the paperwork. It's not though, I mean, it's not obviously unified, like other places from people that I speak to have a different model where you have a team that's owning the paperwork.
Like in my head, I always think that post-sales in many cases leads to pre-sales. So if a CSM is doing a great job, if CSM is doing a horrible job, the customer will never buy again from that company, or at least unless they really, really have to. But if a CSM is doing a great job, they might expand whatever they have today, or they might buy some new product altogether, all thanks to the CSM. And I feel like there's some friction sometimes where the CSM brought in an opportunity, something unrelated to what they're currently doing, and now the account executive comes over and takes over, gets all the credit, gets all the cash, well, some of the cash at least. Yeah. So how do you manage that aspect of it, or is there a way to manage it, or just suck it up and move on?
So, and we're not at this level of maturity at Incorta, but and I'm saying this just to caveat that it's not necessarily something that we're implementing today, but as customer success within an organization gets more mature in terms of processes and defining like what they are focusing on, what they are working on, then organizations have implemented something equivalent to the MQ, to the marketing qualified lead, and being CS qualified lead, right? Because as you rightly so, like if we're doing, especially within subscription businesses, if we are doing the right motions, then ideally you're getting it. I mean, in sales, it's easier to sell to an existing customer, right? Like it's not a cold engagement. You're not starting from
Exactly.
scratch.
Yeah.
And this is like the concept of, we're not doing a funnel, we're doing a butterfly, right? So you're bringing in,
Right.
but then you're also expanding on the other side post sale. And this is where, right, so if we are doing the right motions, then customer success is feeding your lead funnel within your existing accounts. Now, again, is it the CSM doing it? Is it AE doing it through like account-based marketing and engagement? It depends on your go-to-market model,
Yeah.
right? But there's nothing that says like customer success should not be able to be feeding leads in, like marketing is doing with your account-based marketing. And it has been more or less figured out. There's like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying there's no friction.
Well,
I'm
yeah.
not saying there's
Well,
no friction between marketing and sales, but
yeah.
it's
Well, never. It's just
yeah.
the reason that we're talking about like incentivization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes companies incentivize salespeople to let an opportunity slip so they can get paid more commission, right? What's the incentive for a CSM to find new leads, and if someone else is going to take all the credit, right? That's what my thought process behind it. Would they be incentivized for a CS qualified lead?
So I mean, in the end, when you're looking at even post-sales metrics, you're not looking for a net retention of 100%. I mean, typically you're aiming for 115 to 120%. So that 20%, I mean, there is an inherent metric that's driving expansion. I think it's the question now is, where is the commission flowing? And these are typically conversations, really, like agreements between the different leaders and the CFO on saying, all right, are we okay double booking, right? There's nothing that says you can't pay, like double book. Now, I think the question becomes more at the individual level. Do I have like the incentive to actually push because my commission reflects that? And I think this becomes more of an organizational conversation, really. One, what incentivizes my team? Because we need to make we need to differentiate team specific. What is the profile of the individuals that make up customer success? Because I've been in organizations where customer success is consultants, and I've been in organizations where customer success is sales, and personal drivers are different. So it's not always like commission. Obviously, you need to reflect it, right? Like someone who does a good job, that has to be kind of be differentiated. I think it then becomes, all right, a discussion between the different top-level leadership on saying, are we willing to overpay on commission? What do I mean by that? So yes, we're paying 100% commission to the account executive, but also we're paying another, let's say 15% commission to the CSM and 5% commission to the SE, or 10% commission to the SE on those deals, because we're driving the right incentive? Or do we want to cut back? And are there like other mechanisms like spiffs that, you know, like just on the spot bonuses to drive this?
Right.
And I like that. The reason why, like, I find it difficult to say, well, this is the magic recipe, is, like, again, it depends on so many parameters. I don't think there's the right answer. It's
so I don't think there's the right answer. I agree, but I think there's also wrong answers.
It's tuning. Yeah, I mean, I agree. And
because like I've worked for companies where, like in my previous company, they basically, we had one quota, right, for everything that we sell. And then they decided, you know what, we want to incentivize people to sell a specific product line. So they took our quota and they split it. They said, all right, you have your main quota, and then you have that product line. And you don't hit quota unless you hit both of these product lines. Right? Except for me, I look at them, it's like, I don't have any customers for this new product line that you want me to sell. Zero. Like, I don't have a requirement for it. It's not like I have requirements and they can't sell it. There's zero interest. So basically, you just told me that I cannot hit quota no matter what I do.
Yeah. So now we're going into like account assignment and territory planning and the quota assignment. I think it's and this is where like high level strategy, then like they say, like the rubber hits the road and you figure out, well,
Yeah.
yes, I can come up with high level strategies as much as I want. How does it translate then in execution? And this is
Yeah.
why execution is the difficult part.
Yeah. And I find like the bigger the company and the higher up the decisions are made, the less reflective they are about reality sometimes. So,
At the individual level, yeah,
yeah,
at
at
the
the
individual
individual level.
level,
So,
and especially like I think like one of the things probably when we start looking more into when we want teams to collaborate, because obviously like everyone at least says their customer experience is important. We want to make sure like we understand the customer journey, we're servicing them. To do that, then you really want the teams to be collaborating, right? But
yeah.
then how do you quantify and how do you incentivize, for example, having customer success engaged on sales deals? Because again, in the ideal world, you want CSMs or CSM leadership part of late stage sales conversations,
Yeah.
because I mean, we all know every software we're selling covers 70% of the customer's needs at best.
Yeah.
How can I then make sure that my 70%
It's
is
better
one,
than
what
somebody.
covers the customer's needs, and actually what they end up buying, right?
Right.
So yes, we want them to be incentivized. We want them to collaborate. We want them to be part of those conversations, for example, as a mechanism of collaboration or bringing reference customers. But then, how do we make sure that we're encouraging them, incentivizing them to do this? And then the other way, the other way, it still applies, because there are needs within customer success to get content, to get, let's say, whatever is being promised to a customer as things are being sold, and then handed over with a proper handover, which almost never happens. But how do you incentivize that? Because people want to just be done, jump to the other thing, right? And I think
Yeah.
these are the challenging components of scaling organizations and teams.
Yeah. Actually, like talking about that, when I worked in network design, so it was not customer success, but it was post sales, and it was basically building networks for customers. And I always complained, like, what did these guys sell? Because I was never involved in the sales process, and I could never find the SE that sold that to the customer. And now I'm in the sales world, and I put a lot of conscious efforts to go make sure that whatever I'm selling can be implemented. But sometimes it's hard to get that information from people,
Mm-hmm.
especially like post sales, or especially like when we work with product management who's desperate to sell. They want to sell whatever. So, oh yeah, we'll figure it out after. And then whoever needs to implement is like, what did you sell? Right? Well, go talk to the PM. They said they're gonna do it. So how is it that you? I don't think you can. It's not a CSM problem, and it's not a pre-sales problem. It's like you mentioned earlier. It's an organizational problem.
Mm-hmm.
How, like, you're responsible for post sales right now. How do you make sure that post sales and pre sales, as person responsible for only one of them, actually work together and collaborate?
So it's I think it's simple in concept. It's discipline. It's much harder in execution. And I think so. We have a few things that we do. So one, it's aligning the processes. One, defining that this is important, having the agreement that this is important, and then defining the processes around this. I'll talk broadly because it still applies even to post sales. Because you mentioned product commitment to customers, and the mechanism that we're doing today around this is actually this is captured and this is highlighted and gone through in every quarter through engineering, PM, field. Let's not say post sales, it's field planning. So what we do is we go through the quarterly planning with all the commitments or the prioritizations that have been captured across leadership levels. to define, all right, this is what we promised to the customer, this is what will be prioritized, and then in certain cases, yes, it has to be deferred because we can't do anything, and then we need mechanisms to communicate that out. The other element of this is, again, is I don't think it has to be complicated to start with. When we're talking about post-sales to pre-sales, it's one agreeing that, hey, you know what, I will put the time and the commitment so that I am invited to, or I mean, my team or like the individuals relevant within support or post-sales to be part of the, in our case, like we're following the standard Salesforce stages, which stage 3 is like you're negotiating to close stage 4 being closed.
Right.
So as part of stage 3 conversations, there is someone from support management who is part of the conversations that are happening there, so that at least there's awareness and documentation of what's being done and agreed. Now, obviously, that works because at Incorta, we do follow a proof of value model to sales engineering, and therefore there is more of internal engagement and work that's being done on whatever is being proposed. There are things that maybe can be done in the ideal world. Not sure if, I mean, it's part of the puzzle. It's alignment on systems. And what do I mean by that? Can we make sure that if it's not possible that all the teams are working within the right system and therefore exchanging the information, there is good integration? Because that's a personal belief of mine. If we need to rely on humans moving information around, things will fall through the cracks.
Yep.
So can we build it in the system?
Can we?
I mean, with the investment, I think yes, and there are examples of organizations who have done it.
Okay.
That's something, for example, that we are working on within Incorta, so integrating post-sales. And again, we go back now to, right, where is the alignment, what's leadership, etc.
Yeah.
There are a lot of components to this, but systems play a key component into this. And again, information, at least if it's available, people are working within the same the same system, then ideally the information is findable.
Okay. The challenge I see most people have, and maybe you don't have that, but let's say my manager, they think of a system that they want to implement, especially in large organizations. There's no way it's going to reach the decision maker. It's so far removed from the decision maker. So I don't know if it's the same for small. I hope it's not the same for smaller companies.
For smaller organizations, I think alignment is easier. I think there's a different challenge in resourcing change. So investing in change, so whereby maybe you end up with like 1,000 systems in larger organizations because each smaller group will build up their system. I think the challenge in smaller organizations becomes more, right, can we actually transition? Can we invest in this whole kind of migration? Is it the right investment to make, given what limitations are in place?
Okay. We've been talking for quite a bit, and we're almost at the top of our hour. Was there a question that you were hoping I was going to ask you, which I did not?
I think we went through a number of questions. We raised like a few interesting points. I think we covered most of the stuff that we want to talk about.
Yeah. Maybe next time we'll pick one, because you meant, like, we talked about incentivization mismatch. We talked about funnel versus butterfly, which is a term I've never heard before, and maybe we can dig into it some other time. But there was a lot of information, and we touched briefly on all of it. So I appreciate that. It is time to move on to the not so fire round. These are the same 4 questions I ask almost every guest. I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's not fire round, so you can take your time answering it, depending on how much time you have to stay with us. So start with question 1. What is it that you love? I usually ask about sales engineering, but right now you're not. You're in like VP of support. What is it that you love about what you do today?
So I think I'll answer actually both questions because I still feel
Okay.
like at heart I'm a sales engineer. I love technical selling, and I think it's really getting to that aha moment, right? Like when you're in sales engineering and you're working with someone, and then you're painting the art of the possible for them, and then they get it. Like you feel they get it, and they respond that they've
Yeah.
gotten it. I think that's as a sales engineer, that's a moment that I'd relish. In leadership, and I think it applies both to SE leadership and post sales. I think it's the same. It's more like leadership. There's a couple of things. There's one, seeing the leaders that I'm developing develop, right? Because like there's the saying where like you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, and it's a lot it's a lot similar when you're developing leaders, and it's like saying, oh yeah, actually that person now is doing it, right? Like they figured
Yeah.
out their own version of it, and that's awesome. And then on the other side is making businesses work, right? And that's like taking like transformation and getting like the on the other side of transformation, saying, yeah, you know what, yeah, this is where we started, this is where we are now. Actually, that was a job well done, right?
Nice. I like that. Seeing leaders you're developing develop. That's pretty cool. All right. Question number 2. What would you consider is your superpower?
My superpower, I think, being able to abstract things, like think abstractly about things. So taking a step back, saying, yeah, you know what, like this is not as complex as it looked like. These are the Lego blocks that make it up.
Yeah.
And then because I feel like that works, you know, with people, with processes, with businesses, helps me understand it and communicate back what I understood. And it works as an SE. I think that's why I love being an SE, and I love being an SE at heart, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, well, I don't know if this is right or wrong. It's just the thought that popped in my head. I think that differentiates stressed people versus not stressed people. And I find people
Interesting.
who get
Can you
stressed.
expand on that?
Well,
It has to be now
well,
your
the reason I'm
answer.
saying that is when there's a problem, maybe not stress. Maybe stress is the wrong word. I'll figure out how to say it better. But when there's a problem, it's not usually one problem. It's a bunch of smaller problems that we need to
Mm-hmm.
figure out. And when people get stressed when they look at that problem and they just can't figure it out because they're seeing it as one big problem,
Mm-hmm.
versus being able to abstract, take a step back, and break it down into smaller puzzle pieces, and then solve each one on its own.
Yeah,
And I think that's the big difference,
yeah,
and that's what people get
yeah,
stressed and not stressed. Yeah, just yeah.
yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
All right, that's the end of the show. Thank you, Fadi, for coming on. Thank you for listening, for being here. I'd love to hear what you took out of this show. Like, what's the biggest or the one thing that you think you can implement? Which for me, as an individual contributor in support, when I worked in support, I'm not in support anymore. Uh, Maybe try to understand the customer more rather than just focus on the engineering issue. I mean, even right now in sales, if there's a customer ticket, that's an opportunity to build relationships. Usually tickets are stressful, customers are unhappy because there's a ticket. Some customers are aware that issues happen, issues arise, so that's fine. But a lot of us just are stressed that, oh, there's an open ticket, and we have so many open tickets that we can't actually build that relationship with the customer. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you, Freddie, again, and thank you for listening. And with that, I'm signing off.